Quillen Drex woke up to the sound of his own screaming, not the most graceful of wake-up calls, but then again, grace was never his strong suit. He had a knack for bad timing and worse luck. He was a storyteller by trade, which, given his current predicament, was about as useful as a chocolate space suit in a meteor shower. The synthetic Dreamscape was a nightmare dressed up in neon, a cruel joke spun by the alien confluence. They had a twisted sense of humor, as if Kafka had taken up interior decorating with a penchant for existential dread. Humans had been plucked from their reality and dropped into this digital purgatory, where memories were rewritten with the efficiency of a bureaucrat on a caffeine binge. Great, just great, Quillen muttered to himself, rubbing his temples. Trapped in a bad acid trip with the universe's worst interior designer. He stood up, the ground beneath his feet a swirling mass of colors that made him feel like he was balancing on a painter's palette. Around him, shapes flickered and morphed, sometimes into familiar things, mostly into less so. Sarah appeared beside him, her face twisted in that perpetual smirk of hers that suggested she knew something he didn't, which was usually everything. Nice of you to join the party, Drex. I was beginning to think you'd snooze through the apocalypse. Yeah, well, I figured if the world's ending, might as well get some beauty sleep. Not that it worked, Quillen shot back, running a hand through his mess of hair. What's the story here? Story. More like a bad joke, Sarah replied. The confluence are rewriting our memories, turning us into blank slates, compliant little puppets ready to dance to their tune. Quillen snorted. Great, I always wanted to be a marionette. How's the string theory working out for you? Sarah rolled her eyes, the only constant in a shifting landscape. This place is a minefield. The confluence doesn't just rewrite memories, they make new ones, bad ones. Like that time I tried to make soup in 0G. Worse, much worse, Sarah said, her smirk fading. They bury you in fear and doubt until you forget what's real. Quillen gave a low whistle. Guess I picked the wrong day to quit drinking. Sarah snorted, crossing her arms. We need to find a way out, Drex, something outside this. Lunacy, he nodded, trying to focus through the sensory overload. In the distance, the landscape twisted, forming impossible angles that hurt to look at. Got any bright ideas, or are we winging it? We find a crack in their control, Sarah said, scanning the horizon. A glitch, if you will. You're the storyteller, Drex. Surely you've got a tale or two about heroes escaping impossible odds. Sure, Quillen said with a shrug. But those guys usually have a sword or a blaster or a magic wand. Not much use for a guy with words, Sarah chuckled. Then make it work for you. Start spinning those tales. Maybe we can confuse them with your ramblings. Oh, so my life's work boiled down to ramblings, he replied, mock offense in his voice. Thanks, Sarah. The landscape around them shimmered, a kaleidoscope of chaos. Quillen wondered if he'd ever see normal again. Not that normal was that amazing. Back home, normal meant paying rent and hoping the heat didn't give out in the dead of night. Ever feel like you're the punchline to a cosmic joke? He asked. Every day, Sarah said. But there's no point in being a victim if you can help it. We either fight or we become part of the background. Quillen nodded, appreciating her resolve. They say the pen is mightier than the sword, but they never mentioned anything about alien dreamscapes. Then you're a pioneer, Sarah said, a rare note of sincerity in her voice. You either find a way to use those stores of yours or we're toast. Well, I do like toast, Quillen replied, his mind already spinning tales of heroes and rebels, of resistance against impossible odds. They set off, Sarah leading the way through the shifting madness. Quillen followed, a reluctant hero armed with nothing but words and a wit that sometimes got him into more trouble than out. As they walked, the dreamscape continued to warp, attempting to ensnare them in its madness. Quillen could feel the pressure of the confluence. They were like a heavy fog trying to seep into his mind. So, Quillen said, trying to keep the conversation going as much to distract himself as Sarah. What do you think our chances are? Slim to none, Sarah replied, not missing a beat. But then again, those are about the same odds we had when we started, and here I thought I was the pessimist, realist, Drex. Pessimist is just another word for someone who's right one day too soon. Quillen chuckled at that, grateful for her company, even if she did have the bedside manner of a drill sergeant. As they pressed on, the landscape became more treacherous, intent on breaking them. Shadows loomed larger, and the air hummed with the threat of erasure. Quillen could feel the confluence's influence trying to worm its way into his mind, tugging at threads of doubt and fear. You ever think about how we got here? Quillen asked, looking over at Sarah. All the time, she replied, her eyes fixed on the path ahead. But that's the past, we're in the now. Yes, the now's looking about as friendly as a starved hyena, Quillen muttered. Then let's give it something to chew on, Sarah said, gesturing for him to step up his pace. As they moved, Quillen tried to spin a story, a tale of defiance and survival, hoping it would pierce the veil of madness around them. The words came slow at first, like pulling teeth, but then they flowed, a river of resistance against the tide of oblivion. Once upon a time, he began, feeling a spark of something warm and defiant in his chest. In a world not so different from this one, there were those who refused to kneel, even when the sky itself turned against them. Sarah glanced back, a rare smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Keep talking, Drex. Maybe you can bore them to death. Quillen grinned, the fear subsiding just a little. What can I say? I've got a captive audience. The path twisted before them, the dreamscape resisting their presence with every step. But they pressed on, a storyteller and a warrior, bound by a shared defiance and the will to carve a story out of chaos. In the distance, something shimmered, a beacon of hope or perhaps another trick. But Quillen wasn't about to let the universe win without a fight. Hey, Sarah, he called, picking up the pace. Yeah, she replied, her focus unwavering. Let's make sure this is one story that ends with a bang, not a whimper. Sounds like a plan, she said, that familiar smirk back on her face. And with that, they pressed forward into the uncertain future, guided by tales of hope and the stubborn refusal to fade quietly into the night. The dreamscape flickered like a dying fluorescent bulb, crackling with the static of a universe that couldn't quite decide what the hell it wanted to be. Quillen Drex trudged forward, feeling like a man walking uphill in a snowstorm made of confusion, each step another battle against a reality that seemed as stable as a drunk on a unicycle. Sarah, ever the optimist, or whatever the hell passed for optimism in this place, kept a steady pace beside him. Behind her perpetual smirk lay a brain that worked faster than a hyperdrive on overclock, which was useful because Quillen's was still booting up. Any brilliant ideas on where to find this glitch? Quillen asked, scanning the horizon for anything that didn't resemble a Salvador Dali painting on speed. You mean besides wandering aimlessly and hoping the cosmic lottery pays out? Sarah replied, her eyes darting around. Not particularly. Great, Quillen muttered. Always wanted to die as a cautionary tale. Just then the dreamscape hiccuped, ripples cascading through the neon abyss. Out of the chaos a shape emerged, less blob, more blob adjacent, but definitely human, sort of. Is that another person? Quillen asked, squinting as if that would make the figure any less blurry. Looks like we're not the only ones with bad taste in vacation spots, Sarah said, her smirk widening as they moved toward the figure. Up close, the stranger's features snapped into focus. She was a short, wiry woman with a face etched like a roadmap of bad choices, and a posture that screamed pragmatism over politeness. Her hands were busy with a contraption that looked like it could either save their lives or explode in their faces. Typical engineer, really. Thessa Merck, she introduced herself without looking up, fingers dancing over her gizmo. If you're here to steal my lunch money, get in line. Quillen Drex, raconteur extraordinaire, and this is Sarah. We're not here for lunch money, just a way out, she shrugged, which Quillen took as a sign she was at least half listening. Way out, good luck with that. This place is like a buffet of existential crises and the main course is despair. Sounds tasty, Quillen replied. What are you working on? Trying to cobble together a signal jammer. Something to mess with the Confluence's brainwashing signal, or maybe just give them a headache. Who knows? She paused to wipe non-existent sweat from her brow. Last thing I remember, I was fixing a solar array. Now I'm in this hellhole. Figures, trust me, hellholes are my specialty, Quillen said, thinking back to his apartment, where the plumbing was more of a suggestion than a feature. Join the club, Sarah said. Any idea why they brought you here? Thessa shook her head. I'm guessing it wasn't for my winning personality. Or mine, said a voice from behind them, deep and smooth like a con artist's promise. A tall, lean figure stepped out from the shadows, his face a mask of calm intrigue. He was dressed in clothes that looked like they'd seen better days, centuries ago. Ven Tarkov, he introduced himself. Historian, wanderer, professional skeptic. Great, Quillen deadpanned. A storyteller, an engineer, and a historian walk into a nightmare. Sounds like the setup to a bad joke. Tell me about it, Ven replied with a wry smile. Last thing I was doing was cataloging ancient civilizations. Now I'm trapped with you lot. Cosmic comedy indeed. We're piecing together that this dreamscape isn't just a prison, Sarah said, eyes darting between Thessa and Ven. It's malleable. We think we can manipulate it with imagination or narrative. Imagination, huh? Thessa mused, her attention still on her device. I knew there was a reason I kept my Tin Can Thinkers Club membership. And narrative. Ven added, a world shaped by stories. How delightfully ironic, especially since my immediate story arc involves avoiding becoming an alien's puppet. Speaking of which, Sarah interjected, there's a problem. We're not alone. The Confluence has sent emissaries, the Weavers, to hunt us down. Of course they did, Quillen sighed. Because why make it easy? Easy's overrated, Thessa said, grinning as her device beeped triumphantly. There, jammer's ready. Probably won't work, but making things explode is always fun. Let's hope it targets them and not us, Sarah added, glancing around nervously. The air around them vibrated with tension, like the moment before a storm breaks. Quillen wondered if this was what it felt like to be a bug under a magnifying glass, right before the sunbeam turned lethal. So what's the plan? Ven asked, his eyes scanning the horizon like a hawk with a PhD. Simple, Quillen said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. We stick together, find this glitch, and exploit the hell out of it. With any luck, we escape before the confluence decides we're better off as thoughtless drones. Luck. In this place, Thessa laughed, a sound with more edge than humor. You're more optimistic than you look. Gotta be, Quillen replied. Otherwise, the universe wins. And I'm stubborn enough not to let that happen. They set off as a ragtag quartet, navigating the labyrinthine insanity of the dreamscape. Every corner turned revealed new horrors and wonders, a river of molten glass here, a forest of upside-down trees there. All scenes from a fever dream nobody remembered ordering. So then Quillen started, trying to strike up conversation while ignoring the unsettling sensation of eyes watching from the shadows. Got any stories to share? Preferably ones that don't end with us all dead. I could tell you about the fall of the Xylos Empire, Ven offered. Ends in betrayal, murder, and a particularly nasty plague. But I'll spare you the details. Uplifting, Sarah deadpanned. Got anything more cheery? Depends. Do you consider survival in a hostile universe cheery? Compared to this, yes, Quillen said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. As they walked, the dreamscape seemed to twist around them, reacting to their presence. Every step felt like a gamble, each heartbeat a roll of the dice. It was a game without rules, barely any players, and yet here they were, hoping against hope that they'd find a way to feed the machine their stories instead of the other way around. Quillen's mind spun with tales of ancient heroes, of gods and monsters, of triumphs and failures. He imagined threads of narrative weaving into the very fabric of the dreamscape, binding it to their will instead of the confluences. It was a comforting thought, even if it was naive. Their journey was punctuated by frequent stops, moments where Thessa would fiddle with her device, Ven would muse on the past, and Quillen would throw out one-liners like confetti at a funeral, anything to keep their spirits from sinking too deep into despair. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of wandering, they stumbled upon a peculiar sight, a crack in the dreamscape, a jagged tear leaking light like a wound in reality. It throbbed with potential, the promise of escape hanging heavy in the air. Looks like we found our glitch, Thessa said, eyes wide with a mix of fear and excitement. And our way out, Sarah added, though her tone was cautious, as if waiting for the universe to yank the rug out from under them. Let's not celebrate just yet, Ven warned. The Weavers will be close. They've got a talent for showing up at the least convenient times. Wonderful, Quillen muttered, eyeing the tear. Nothing like being fashionably late to your own rescue. As if on cue, the air crackled with menace, and shadows began to coalesce around them, dark forms twisting into humanoid shapes, weavers, with eyes like burning coals and limbs that seemed woven from nightmares. Time to see if this thing works, Thessa said, flipping a switch on her jammer. The device let out a high-pitched whine, the kind of noise that set teeth on edge and made dogs howl. The weavers paused, their movements stuttering as if caught in a glitch of their own. Now what? Sarah shouted over the din, her voice barely audible above the chaos. We run, Quillen yelled back, grabbing Thessa by the arm and pulling her toward the crack. The group bolted, adrenaline pushing them faster than they thought possible. The weavers, momentarily disoriented, recovered quickly, giving chase with a fluid grace that would have been beautiful if it weren't so damn terrifying. Quillen's heart pounded in his chest, fear and determination warring for control. He could feel the stories he'd been spinning pressing against his mind, urging him to take control, to shape the narrative. Once upon a time, a ragtag band of misfits defied the odds. He began, breathless but defiant, each word a weapon against the encroaching darkness. Sarah joined in, her voice steady and strong. In a place where reality bent to the whims of gods, these unlikely heroes forged their own path. Ven's voice followed, deep and resonant. With courage and cunning, they turned the tide of fate, refusing to bow to the will of tyrants. Thessa added her voice to the mix, a note of raw defiance ringing clear. And in the end, it was their spirit, not their strength, that carried them to victory. The crack in the dreamscape shimmered with their words, widening as if responding to their combined will. Quillen could feel the tide turning, the dreamscape beginning to bend, not to the confluence, but to them. They reached the crack, breathless and desperate, and Quillen turned to face the weavers one last time. This isn't the end of our story, he shouted, feeling the words resonate with a power he hadn't known he possessed. With one final push, they leapt through the crack, plunging into the unknown with nothing but hope and a hell of a lot of stubbornness to guide them. Behind them, the dreamscape howled, and the world dissolved into a blur of light and sound. They fell, tumbling through a vortex of sensation, and Quillen couldn't help but laugh, a wild, unrestrained sound that bubbled up from depths he hadn't known existed. Here's to the next chapter, he thought, just before everything went dark and the dream began anew. The brutal irony of escaping one nightmare only to tumble headfirst into another wasn't lost on Quillen. His vision cleared, revealing a land that looked like someone had taken a Picasso painting, dipped it in acid, and then tried to feed it to a malfunctioning AI. The sky was a shade of puce that would give a colorblind man a migraine, and the ground was an artist's impression of chaos itself. Zigzag patterns, random puddles of what looked like liquid chrome, and the occasional floating geometric shape that defied all logic. "Well, this looks hospitable," Sarah commented dryly, brushing herself off. Her optimism seemed to have taken a holiday, leaving sarcasm in its place. "Welcome to the Hotel Purgatory," Ven said, appearing as calm as ever, though his eyes darted around with the alertness of a man expecting a punchline. "Where the decor is always avant-garde and the service is non-existent," Quillen exhaled, trying to get a grip on the wild beating of his heart. "At least it's consistent with the rest of this bizarro amusement park," he muttered, glancing around for any sign of immediate danger, like weavers or worse, motivational speakers. Tessa's attention was already on her device, a small gadget that looked like it would be more at home in a thrift shop than a sci-fi thriller. The jammers fried. That burst through the glitch overloaded its circuits. "Fantastic," Quillen grunted. "As if our odds weren't long enough," Ven, ever the historian, chuckled. "Well, at least we're still alive. That's usually a plus in most stories, though I'm not sure how long that's gonna last," Sarah added, her eyes scanning the warped reality around them. "This place feels even less stable than the last one. I'm starting to wonder if stability was ever part of the Confluence's construction plans." Tessa mused, fiddling with her broken gadget like it was a particularly stubborn puzzle. "Guess they skipped the course on ethical architecture." Quillen's mind was less concerned with intergalactic building codes and more preoccupied with the incoming sense of dread. As if summoned by their doubts, the dreamscape began to ripple, the air shimmering like a mirage on a desert highway. "Anyone else getting that we're being watched feeling?" Quillen asked, trying to sound casual rather than paranoid. "Every minute of every day since we got here," Sarah replied, her laugh hollow. "Feels like being in a reality TV show where the audience has laser-guided missiles." Before anyone could reply, the air split with a sound like tearing fabric. Shadows began to creep along the ground, reaching towards them with fingers of inky blackness. The weavers were returning, drawn by their fear and uncertainty like sharks to blood. "Great, they're back," Tessa said, her voice laced with frustration. "And here I was hoping for a peaceful stroll through the end of reason." The weavers emerged, moving with a fluidity that made it clear they were more than shadows, less than solid, a contradiction given form. Their eyes burned like embers in a dying fire, glowing with a malevolent intelligence that promised more than just a simple death. "Any ideas?" Sarah asked, her voice tight with tension, but still holding a spark of defiance. Quillen racked his brain for something, anything that could turn the tide in their favor. His role as a storyteller had always been more about embellishing the truth, not creating it, but now he felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him like a leaden shroud. Tell them a bedtime story," Quillen suggested, the sarcasm a veil for his uncertainty. "Maybe lull them to sleep," Ven snorted. "Unless they're fans of existential horror, I doubt that'll work. We need more than just words," Tessa grumbled, her eyes glued to the weavers as they closed in. "We need to manipulate the narrative itself." "Great," Quillen muttered, "because altering reality is just what I was trained for. All we can do is try," Sarah said, her voice steady. "We've manipulated the dreamscape before, even if it was just a crack. Maybe we can do it again, bigger this time. Only one way to find out," Tessa agreed, glancing at Quillen. "Ready to put your storytelling skills to the ultimate test with stakes like these?" Quillen forced a grin. Always, as the weavers neared, the group huddled together, their collective will the only weapon they had against the encroaching darkness. Quillen took a deep breath, drawing on every tale he'd ever told, every lie he'd ever spun into gold. "Once upon a time," he began, his voice carrying through the dreamscape like a challenge, "there was a group of misfits who refused to bow to the tyranny of shadows." Sarah picked up the thread, her words weaving into his. "In a world where reality bent like a reed, they stood firm, defying both fate and despair. And when all seemed lost," Ven added, his voice deep and resonant, "they reached within themselves to find the courage to shape their own destiny." Tessa's voice rose, clear and defiant. Together they forged a path through the madness, lighting the way with their unyielding spirit. The words took on a life of their own, the dreamscape vibrating in response. Colors shifted, patterns reformed, and the ground beneath their feet seemed to solidify, reality itself bending to the will of their shared narrative. The weavers paused, hesitating as if caught in the grip of an unseen force. Their eyes flickered, momentarily losing their menacing glow. "Keep going," Sarah urged, her voice filled with hope and determination. "We're getting through to it." Quillen's heart pounded, exhilaration mixing with fear as the dreamscape began to crack around them like an egg under pressure. And so, against all odds, they stood together, facing the darkness and refusing to yield. The weavers faltered, their forms flickering like a faulty hologram. The dreamscape shuddered, the air filled with a pressure that promised change, either salvation or destruction. It was impossible to tell. But just when it seemed like they might succeed, the weavers unleashed a psychic assault, a barrage of images and emotions meant to shatter their will. Nightmares clawed at the edges of their minds, visions of failure and despair swirling in a maelstrom of fear. Quillen struggled to maintain his focus, the weight of doubt pressing down on him like a vice. He saw himself alone, trapped in this endless purgatory, his friends reduced to echoes of their former selves. "Don't let it get to you," Thessa shouted, though her voice was strained. "We've got this, do we, though?" Quillen muttered, the seeds of doubt taking root despite himself. "Of course we do," Sarah snapped, her voice fierce. "We've survived this long, haven't we?" Ven's voice cut through the chaos, calm and unyielding. "Remember, every story has its low points. This is just ours." Their words were a lifeline, pulling Quillen back from the brink. With renewed determination, he focused on the story they'd been weaving, the shared narrative that was their only hope. And so, even in the darkest hour, he continued, his voice rising above the din. They found the strength to fight on, united by the bonds of friendship and hope. The dreamscape responded, light spilling from invisible seams, banishing the shadows and forcing the weavers to retreat, hissing and writhing as they were pushed back by the power of their story. With a final, desperate push, the group surged forward, the dreamscape yielding under their combined will. The weavers' assault faltered, their forms dissolving like smoke in the wind, leaving the path clear at last. Breathless and shaking, they stumbled onward, the dreamscape settling into a semblance of calm around them. They had won for now, but the price had been high. "Next time," Thessa said, her voice hoarse but laced with a wry humor, "let's pick a destination with fewer homicidal hallucinations." "Agreed," Quillen replied, relief mingling with exhaustion. "Though I doubt we'll get the chance." Ven nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The weavers will be back. We've only bought ourselves a little time, then we'd better make the most of it," Sarah said, her optimism returning, albeit tempered by experience. They continued their journey through the ever-shifting landscape, united by a shared purpose and the knowledge that together they could bend even the harshest reality to their will. Quillen couldn't shake the feeling that their story was far from over, but for now they had won a small victory. And in a universe where hope was as rare as it was precious, that was enough. As they pressed on, Quillen couldn't help but chuckle. "You know, for a nightmare, this isn't so bad. I've had worse Mondays. Speak for yourself," Thessa shot back, though her smile was genuine. "I could do without the existential dread." "Ah, but where's the fun in that?" Ven asked, his eyes sparkling with a mischief that belied his calm demeanor. Sarah laughed, the sound a welcome balm against the lingering tension. "Come on, Quillen. What's the next part of our story?" Quillen grinned, feeling the weight of their shared narrative lightening his heart. "Let's make it a good one, shall we?" Quillen had long since given up on the idea that the dreamscape would ever make sense. If reality was a deck of cards, this place was a shuffled mess, with the jokers stuffed in for good measure. He glanced at Sarah, who was frowning at the warped horizon like she wanted to give it a stern talking to. "You ever get the feeling the confluence was designed by a committee of particularly bored gods?" Quillen asked, trying to keep his tone light. "One that got a kick out of watching ants navigate an ever-changing maze." Sarah snorted, "More like a bunch of toddlers with a cosmic etch-a-sketch. Right when you think you've got a handle on the picture, they shake it all up." Ven was a few steps ahead, eyeing the shifting landscape with the cautious expression of a man who'd seen one too many bad reruns. If they're toddlers, then we're the unfortunate babysitters. Underpaid, undervalued, and over it. Speaking of over it, Thessa said, her focus returning from a particularly stubborn piece of tech she was tinkering with. "I'm starting to think the weavers aren't just here for laughs." As if on cue, the shadows began to crawl back, slinking across the ground like ink spilled on paper. The weavers were returning, their hunger for chaos apparently insatiable. The air around them shimmered, the pressure building like a bad punchline no one wanted to hear. "Looks like the toddlers are back for round 2, Quillen muttered, trying to keep his sarcasm sharp enough to cut through the fear knotting his stomach. "And I didn't even bring snacks," Sarah grimaced, pulling out a small, charred device that had once been a jammer. "No snacks, no toys, and now no jammers." "We're really on top of things." The weavers moved closer, their forms flickering in and out of solidity, eyes glowing with a predatory intelligence that suggested they were more than just figments of a fevered imagination. Thessa sighed, tucking her gadget into a pocket with the resignation of someone who knew she wouldn't be needing it anytime soon. "All right, time to get creative," Ven said, his voice a shade too calm for the situation. "Quillen, you up for another round of story time?" Quillen rubbed the back of his neck, more than aware of the weight of expectation resting on his shoulders. "Sure, because telling bedtime stories to nightmares is exactly what I trained for." He watched as Thessa nodded, her gaze fixed on the weavers. We need to figure out how to use this narrative thing to actually push them back. The last time felt like a fluke. Fluke or not, it's all we've got, Sarah added, her eyes darting between the encroaching shadows and her friends. Who knew imagination would be our best defense? Not me, Quillen said with a wry smile. I always thought it was just useful for avoiding chores. The weavers were nearly upon them, their presence a chilling reminder of just how precarious their situation was. Quillen took a deep breath, trying to focus as the dreamscape quivered with anticipation. Once upon a time, he began, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around them, there was a band of misfits who refused to be mere footnotes in someone else's story. We're the kind of people who rewrite the rules, Sarah chimed in, her words a thread of defiance woven into the shared narrative. Even if the rules were written by a bunch of cosmic pranksters, and when those pranksters thought they'd won, Ven added, his tone dry as a desert, the misfits decided to change the ending. Thessa joined in, her voice carrying a note of challenge. Because sometimes the only way to win is to rewrite the script. The weavers hesitated, their forms flickering as if caught between two conflicting realities. The ground beneath their feet solidified, the dreamscape responding to the power of their collective defiance. Quillen felt a surge of hope, but it was tempered by the knowledge that they were far from finished. The weavers regrouped, their eyes burning with an intensity that suggested they were just getting started. Keep going, Sarah urged, her determination a beacon in the encroaching darkness. And so they fought, Quillen continued, his voice rising with the momentum of their shared narrative, not with swords or fists but with the power of their shared story. The dreamscape trembled, the air crackling with the promise of change, but the weavers weren't backing down. Instead, they unleashed a psychic assault, an overwhelming torrent of fear meant to crush their resolve. Quillen's mind was bombarded with visions of failure, each more vivid than the last. His friends lost, their journey ended in despair. He could feel the weight of those futures pressing down on him, threatening to smother the spark of hope they'd kindled. Don't let him win, Thessa shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos with a clarity that was almost painful. We've come too far to let it all fall apart now. Yet, listen to the lady, Ven added, his calm demeanor a steadying presence in the storm of emotions. Besides, if we give up, we'll never hear the end of it. Quillen gritted his teeth, fighting to hold onto the thread of their story. Even when faced with impossible odds, he said, his voice unwavering, they pressed on, their strength drawn from the bonds they'd forged. The dreamscape resonated with their words, light spilling forth to drive back the encroaching shadows. The weavers faltered, their forms blurring as the narrative took hold. With a final, desperate push, the group poured everything they had into the story, their voices ringing out in unison. Together they faced the darkness, refusing to be defined by it, determined to carve their own path. The weavers howled, their forms dissolving into nothingness as the power of their shared narrative swept them away. The dreamscape settled into a fragile calm, the shadows banished for the moment. Breathing hard, they stood in the aftermath of their victory, the reality around them slowly stabilizing. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough for now. Thessa wiped a hand across her brow, her expression a mix of relief and exhaustion. We did it, we actually did it. Yeah, Quillen said, trying to hide the tremor in his voice, though I'm not sure how many more times we can pull that off. Sarah chuckled, the sound tinged with a weary sort of amusement. Guess we'll just have to keep writing new chapters, huh? Ven nodded, his gaze thoughtful. Our story's far from over, but we've proven that we can change it. Now we just have to keep it up. Quillen glanced around at his friends, the reality of their situation crashing down on him like a wave. They'd bought themselves some time, but the weavers would be back, more determined than ever. Let's move, he said, gesturing for them to follow. We've got a story to finish. As they continued their journey through the ever-shifting landscape, Quillen couldn't help but feel a flicker of optimism, fragile but there. They'd faced the darkness and won, at least for now, and that was no small feat. The dreamscape might be a chaotic maze, but they were learning to navigate it one day at a time. And with each new chapter, they were rewriting their fate, one word at a time. The next time those weavers show up, Thessa said, her voice carrying a note of dry humor, I'll be sure to give them a piece of my mind. Just one piece, Sarah teased, her smile wry. What if they want seconds? Then they'll have to get in line, Thessa replied, her grin matching Sarah's. I'm saving the rest for us. Quillen couldn't help but chuckle, the sound echoing in the dreamscape like a defiant challenge. They were still standing, still fighting, and for now that was enough. As they pressed onward, Quillen felt a renewed sense of purpose. Their journey was far from over, but they'd proven they could bend even the most twisted of realities to their will. With each new chapter, they were forging a path through the madness, lighting the way with their unyielding spirit. What's next in our story, Quillen? Sarah asked, her eyes alight with determination. Quillen grinned, feeling the weight of their shared narrative lifting his spirits. Whatever we want it to be, he said, his voice carrying a note of challenge. Let's make it a story worth telling. and as they continued their journey, the dreamscape shifting around them in a dance of chaos and possibility, Quillen knew one thing for certain. They were writing their own story, and it was going to be one hell of a ride. As they walked, Quillen reflected on the absurdity of their situation. You know, if someone had told me I'd be using my storytelling skills to fend off interdimensional nightmares, I'd have laughed them right out of the room. Yeah, who'd have thought your particular brand of embellishment would be so useful? Sarah shot back, her tone teasing but affectionate. Just goes to show you, Ven added, his smile a sardonic quirk of the lips. You never really know what life's going to throw at you. Or in our case, what life will rewrite while you're not looking. Thessa chuckled, shaking her head as she adjusted her toolkit. Well, whatever happens, at least we're not alone in this insanity. Together, they continued their march through the ever-changing dreamscape, each step a declaration of defiance against the chaos that sought to swallow them whole. The horizon was as unpredictable as ever, but they moved forward with purpose, united by more than just circumstance. We've got a lot of ground to cover, Quillen said, his voice carrying the weight of determination and maybe a touch of gallows humor. Just remember the store is ours to shape, and here's hoping we don't have to reshape it too often, Sarah added, casting a wary glance at the sky, which now seemed to be shedding its puce hue in favor of something equally bizarre. One chapter at a time, Ven agreed, his eyes scanning the horizon, and hopefully with fewer existential crises. Quillen laughed, feeling the tension ease slightly. Let's not get too ambitious. We wouldn't want things to get boring. With a renewed sense of camaraderie, they pressed on, ready to face whatever the dreamscape threw their way. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, rewriting their story one step at a time. Quillen Dreck sat on a rock that looked like it had been sculpted by a mad artist with a taste for the surreal. It was amazing how a simple piece of synthetic dreamscape could make him feel like he was the one being judged. Thessa Merk lay nearby, unconscious, her breath shallow like a whisper lost in the wind. Quillen had seen better days, and today was not one of them. Well, this is just peachy, he muttered, glancing at the chaotic mess that was their current reality. The dreamscape was collapsing like a souffle in an earthquake, and they were stuck in the middle with no clear way out. Thessa's life hung in the balance, and by the looks of things, it was going to be a short hang. Sarah was hunched over Thessa, trying to make sense of the chaos. I've been in some tight spots before, but this one's a doozy, she said, her voice a mix of frustration and worry. Why do the rules of this place change more often than a politician's promises? Because it was designed by a bunch of cosmic pranksters with too much time on their hands, Quillen replied, his tone dry as a Martian desert. And here I thought the biggest mystery I'd face in life was how to fold a fitted sheet. Ven stood a little way off, his arms crossed as he surveyed the landscape with the air of a man who had seen it all before. We've got two choices, he said, voice as collected as ever. We sit here and wait for the end, or we find a way to give this nightmare a little plot twist. Quillen snorted, rubbing a hand over his face. Plot twist, huh? What are we supposed to do? Write ourselves a happy ending with invisible ink? Sarah shot him a look. Don't give up on us now, Quillen. We've come too far to let it all fall apart because of a few bad breaks. Few bad breaks, he repeated, incredulous. Thessa's down for the count, and we're stuck in a disaster zone that changes more often than my socks. Ven uncrossed his arms, stepping forward. You ever heard of the Battle of Tenebrae? A bunch of miners, outnumbered and outgunned, managed to hold off an entire fleet. They were just ordinary people who decided they weren't going to roll over and die. Quillen looked at him, brow furrowed. What's your point, Ven? That we're supposed to find inspiration in some long-lost history lesson. Ven's gaze was steady. My point is, those miners didn't have a choice. They fought because they had to. We're in the same boat. This isn't about what we can do, it's about what we have to do. Great, Sarah said with a resigned sigh, the old back-against-the-wall speech. Nothing like a little stark reality to brighten up the day. Quillen chuckled, though there was little humor in it. Well, when you put it that way, how can we resist? The ground beneath them rumbled ominously, as if the dreamscape was reminding them that it was on a tight schedule, and they weren't invited to stay much longer. All right, Quillen said, pushing himself to his feet. Let's figure out how to turn a dream into a nightmare, for the weavers, that is. Ven nodded, a ghost of a smile on his lips. Now you're talking. Sarah stood, her eyes sharp with determination. Thessa's going to need a miracle, and we're fresh out of deities. They moved as one, the camaraderie forged in the fires of shared peril propelling them forward. As they delved deeper into the ever-shifting disaster of a dreamscape, Quillen couldn't help but wonder if they'd bitten off more than they could chew. But then again, they'd been living on borrowed time from the start. Any bright ideas on how to fix Thessa? Quillen asked, hoping that anyone, had a plan that didn't involve divine intervention. Sarah shrugged, her expression thoughtful. We need a glitch. Something to throw the system off kilter. Like a jolt to the system, Ven added, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Something big enough to distract the weavers, give us an opening. Great, Quillen said, rubbing his hands together. Anybody know where to find a cosmic defibrillator? Sarah laughed, a sound that was more gallows humor than amusement. If only it were that simple. They pressed on, the landscape shifting around them like a manic kaleidoscope. At times, Quillen was convinced the horizon was laughing at them, a sinister, mocking laugh that echoed in his mind. The ground cracked and fissured, geometric shapes floating and disappearing like figments of a fever dream. I'm starting to think the confluence gets its kicks out of torturing us, Quillen said, sidestepping a particularly aggressive patch of non-Euclidean geometry. Wouldn't surprise me, Sarah replied, her tone wry. It's like being stuck in an art student's fever dream and never waking up. The dreamscape shimmered, a wave of distortion passing through, rearranging the scenery like a deck of cards being shuffled. Quillen's head spun with the motion, but he forced himself to focus, to push on. Finally, they stumbled upon a section where the dreamscape seemed slightly less intent on rewriting reality every few seconds. A flicker of recognition sparked in Ven's eyes. This is it, he said, gesturing to a spot that, to Quillen, looked no different from any other. A fracture in their facade. Sarah leaned in, squinting. A glitch, a possibility, Ven corrected, pragmatic as always, and it's more than we've had in a while. Quillen nodded, the spark of hope rekindling. So what, we just poke at it and hope it doesn't explode? More or less, Ven replied dryly. We don't have much time. Quillen considered, then grinned. Well, nothing ventured, nothing exploded, right? As they gathered around the anomaly, Quillen couldn't shake the feeling that the odds were stacked against them. But then again, when had they ever not been? They'd been playing a losing hand from the start, and somehow they were still in the game. All right, Quillen said, taking a deep breath. Let's see if we can turn this glitch into a lifeline. Sarah nodded, her gaze steady. Whatever happens, we face it together. Ven's lips twitched in a semblance of a smile. We've been rewriting this story all along. Let's give it a real ending. With Thessa's life hanging in the balance, they set to work. Their collective will focused on one goal, survival. As they tinkered with the fabric of a reality that defied understanding, Quillen couldn't help but marvel at the strange camaraderie they'd forged in the fires of chaos. Here they were, a ragtag band of misfits, fighting against forces that had reshaped worlds. Here's to rewriting the rules, Quillen said, his voice carrying the weight of their shared defiance. Sarah grinned, a fierce light in her eyes, and to making the weavers wish they'd never crossed us. Ven nodded, his expression serious. May this story have the ending we deserve. As they worked to unravel the chaotic threads binding them, the dreamscape trembled, a symphony of chaos and possibility. Each moment felt like a lifetime, every second a battle against the encroaching darkness. Yet amid the chaos, there was a strange kind of peace, a certainty that whatever happened next, they would face it together, and perhaps in the end, that was all that mattered. Let's make it count, Quillen said, his voice steady despite the storm raging around them. Sarah and Ven echoed the sentiment, their voices a chorus of determination. To the story we write, they said in unison. As they plunged into the task with renewed vigor, Quillen felt a flicker of hope, a fragile thing, but a beacon nonetheless. In a world where reality was a suggestion and chaos reigned supreme, they were carving a path with nothing more than their will and their words. And as the dreamscape twisted and turned, Quillen knew that no matter what came next, they would face it head-on. Together, they would write their own ending, one step at a time, defying the oddities of a universe intent on rewriting their history. For in the end, it wasn't the dreamscape that defined them, but their unyielding spirit, the courage to stand against the storm and say, not today, and perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough. Quillen Drex, crouched in this Puskai nightmare, rubbed his temples as if he could massage sense into the madness. It struck him then, a thought slinking through the chaos like a well-fed rat in a derelict ship. The dreamscape didn't just bend to stories, oh no. It danced to the emotions behind them, like a lovesick puppy eager to please but with a tendency to bite. All right, gather round, kiddies, Quillen called out, his voice dripping with mock authority. I've had a breakthrough. Sarah raised an eyebrow, skepticism practically dripping off her. Who died and made you the emotional oracle? Not sure, but let's hope the weavers are next on the list. Quillen shot back, not missing a beat. Listen, this place doesn't just play with our stories. It feeds on the raw and ugly bits of ourselves, our emotions. Emotions? Great, Ven said with a dry chuckle, the kind that made sandpaper sound soft. Trust you to make that a weapon. Never underestimate the power of a good sob story, Quillen quipped, or a terrible one. Sarah's gaze turned thoughtful, a dangerous look on her. So we use our own baggage to screw with the weavers, Quillen nodded. Exactly. We tell our worst, most messed up tales, let the dreamscape choke on them. Ven crossed his arms, considering. If it works, it'll disrupt this nightmare enough for us to make a move. Or it'll just make things worse, Quillen said, shrugging. But hey, it's not like we have a decent plan B, or a plan A for that matter, Sarah added. Quillen grinned, feeling a strange camaraderie in their collective despair. All right, who's got a story that'll make the weavers wish they had ears? Sarah stepped forward, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere beyond the chaos. I've got one. It's not pretty, but it's got a kick. The dreamscape seemed to pulse in response, an eager entity drawn to the raw emotion she was about to unleash. Sarah took a breath, her voice steady despite the intensity of her memories. Back home before all this, I was a mechanic, she began, each word laced with a mix of bitterness and nostalgia. Not the kind that fixes engines, mind you, though I could if I had to. No, I fixed people, or tried to at least. Quillen watched as the landscape around them flickered, resonating with the story. The place I lived, we didn't have much, Sarah continued, but we had each other. And when you grow up with nothing, you learn to see the world in scraps, you learn to tinker. The dreamscape rippled, the ground beneath them shifting like a restless sleeper. There was this kid, Sarah said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. Orphan like me, we were a team inseparable, until a malfunctioning drone took him out during a food drop. Quillen winced, feeling the sharp edge of her tail. The dreamscape groaned as if empathizing. I fixed a lot of things after that, Sarah said, her voice hardening. But not that, never that. The air around them buzzed, a tension building that hinted at the dreamscape's unease. Quillen felt the stirrings of disruption, a ripple of chaos that was deliciously out of control. That's the spirit, he said, a twisted smile on his lips. Anyone else want to spill their guts? Ven stepped forward, his expression unreadable. I've got one, might not be as touching, but, he paused, collecting his thoughts. I was stationed on a mining colony once, small operation, but we were scrappy, had to be given the conditions. Quillen nodded, encouraging. Nothing like space rocks and desperation to build character. Ven cracked a rare grin. The mining chief was this real piece of work, greedy bastard. We were knee-deep in ore, but he kept pushing for more. Never enough, never satisfied. The dreamscape twisted, a reflection of his simmering anger. One day I snapped, Ven confessed, his voice low, told him exactly where he could shove his quotas. Next thing I know, I'm on the next shuttle out, and the whole operation goes under without me. Quillen could almost taste the bitterness in Ven's words, the raw emotion like a punch to the gut. Ven shrugged, as if shaking off the past. Lost a lot that day, but I kept my damn dignity. The sky above flickered, a tapestry of puce and chaos. Quillen sensed the dreamscape's weakening grip, the stories slicing through its control like a blade through flesh. Not bad, Quillen said, his voice tinged with admiration. Thessa, you're up next. Thessa lay still, her breath shallow but steady. Quillen leaned closer, hoping for some sign of consciousness, but she remained silent, her battle fought on the inside. We'll count that as a silent but deadly contribution, Quillen said, standing. Now it's my turn. He took a deep breath, dredging up his own dark history. I was once part of a crew. We were tight-knit, a real family. Until one day a job went sideways. We were set up, ambushed by pirates. Sarah and Ven listened, their silence a testament to the weight of his words. I was the only one who made it out, Quillen continued, the memory raw and jagged. Not because I was better or smarter, just luckier. And it wasn't the kind of luck anyone wants. The ground trembled, the dreamscape responding to the collective surge of emotion. I've been running ever since, Quillen confessed, his voice almost lost in the chaos. But not anymore. As the words left his lips, the dreamscape convulsed, its structure unraveling like a poorly knit sweater. The weaver's control weakened, and for the first time, Quillen saw a path forming, a glitch, a way out. Looks like our sob stories did the trick, Sarah said, the tiniest hint of wonder in her voice. More like broke the damn machine, Ven added, a rare smile cracking his stoic facade. Now's our chance, Quillen said, feeling the adrenaline spike. Let's make the weavers regret the day they decided to rewrite our scripts. With a renewed sense of purpose, they moved as one, drawn towards the glitch like moths to a flame. Each step felt like a defiance, a testament to their refusal to be pawns in someone else's game. The dreamscape writhed, its chaotic symphony threatening to drown them out. But they pressed on, their stories raw and unedited, laying the path before them. Here's to making it through, Quillen said, his voice rising above the chaos. Sarah grinned, her eyes fierce with determination, and to screwing over anyone who doubts we can. As they approached the glitch, the dreamscape seemed to shudder, its grip loosening. Quillen could feel the weaver's control faltering, the cracks widening into possibilities. One last push, Ven called out, his voice clear and strong. Let's finish this. They gathered around the glitch, their collective will a force to be reckoned with. Each breath was a rebellion, each heartbeat a challenge to the universe itself. Together, Quillen said, his voice a rallying cry. We face this together. Sarah nodded, her gaze unwavering. And we leave nothing behind. With the dreamscape unraveling around them, they plunged into the glitch, a leap of faith into the unknown. It was a moment suspended in time, a heartbeat stretched into eternity. The world shattered, a kaleidoscope of light and sound, and then silence. They found themselves standing on solid ground, the pure sky above absent, replaced by the familiar starscape of reality. The dreamscape was behind them, a fading nightmare. We did it, Sarah breathed, disbelief lacing her words. Ven nodded, a quiet satisfaction in his expression. Against all odds, Quillen looked around, a grin spreading across his face. Guess the Weavers weren't ready for a plot twist like us. Thessa stirred, her eyes fluttering open. Did we win? We did, Quillen replied, reaching out to help her to her feet. As they stood together, the reality of their victory sinking in, Quillen couldn't help but laugh, a sound full of relief and triumph. Here's to the stories we write, he said, raising an imaginary glass. Sarah and Ven echoed him, their voices a testament to their shared journey. To the stories we write, and in that moment they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them with the same irreverent determination that had carried them through this nightmare. For in the end, it wasn't the dreamscape that defined them, but their unyielding spirit, the courage to stand against the storm and say, not today, and perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough. Quillen Drek surveyed the scene as they stood at the edge of the glitch, mere inches from a cosmic chasm of nonsense that seethed with potential. It was like staring into the belly of insanity itself, and Quillen found himself oddly charmed by the chaos. A bit like a first date with someone you know is going to ruin your life, but hey, at least it's not boring. So what's the plan, fearless leader? Ven's voice cut through Quillen's thoughts like a laser through butter. Do we just jump in and hope for the best, or do we have some kind of strategy that doesn't involve getting our atoms scattered across the confluence? Quillen grinned, feeling the familiar thrill of stupidity dressed up as bravery. Why not both? The plan is simple. We hit the Weavers where it hurts, their tangled web of control. We've got stories that are sharper than any tool we've got. I'm guessing this isn't a once-upon-a-time kind of deal, Sarah said, eyeing the glitch like it might sprout fangs and bite her. Nah, Quillen replied, more like you're never gonna believe this nightmare. The dreamscape around them still pulsated, a living thing eager to drown them in its madness. Quillen felt the pull of it, the way the landscape seemed to lean in, hungry for stories to unravel and consume. All right, he said, turning to face his crew, his dysfunctional little family. We each take a turn, unleash our worst, most tangled memories. The confluence won't know what hit them. Great, Ven said dryly. A therapy session with an audience of one monstrous hive mind. But despite the sarcastic jab, Quillen could see the spark of determination in Ven's eyes. They were in this together, for better or worse, and it was time to make the dreamscape pay for its intrusion into their lives. Sarah stepped up first, her gaze steady. Let's do this. I've got a story about the time I nearly blew up an entire district. Thought I was helping, but turns out folks don't take kindly to that sort of assistance. As she spoke, the dreamscape quivered, the geometry of the place bending, as though Sarah's words were a wrench in its delicate machinery. The district survived, Sarah continued, but my reputation didn't. Ever tried finding work when everyone thinks you're the local demolition expert? Not fun. Quillen watched as her story twisted the landscape, the Weaver's grip visibly faltering. Nice work, he said. Ven, you're up, make it count. Ven nodded, his expression grimly amused. All right, here's one for the ages. Ever been accused of smuggling contraband on a planet where the only contraband is space dust? Spoiler alert, it doesn't end well. As he spoke, the ground beneath them shifted like a petulant child throwing a tantrum. Ven's tale was a direct hit, dismantling the dreamscape's facade with every word. And let me tell you, there's nothing like being chased by an angry mob wielding cleaning equipment. Ven finished, his story leaving the dreamscape in tatters. Quillen felt the momentum building. It was his turn, and he knew exactly which story to tell. A real doozy that had been festering in his mind like a bad song lyric you couldn't shake. I once convinced a colony that I was the reincarnation of their deity, Quillen began, a sardonic grin on his face. Got them to give me their ceremonial spaceship. You know, for religious purposes. The dreamscape balked at his story, the Weaver's control slipping further. Quillen could feel the breath of freedom on the back of his neck, the tantalizing promise of an escape. Turns out, their deity wasn't expected to crash the ship into the nearest moon, he continued, the memory as vivid as the chaos around him. I made it out, but my reputation. Not so much. As Quillen finished, the dreamscape convulsed, the glitch widening like a maw ready to swallow the confluence's control hole. The Weavers recoiled, their power fraying at the edges. Looks like we've hit a nerve, Sarah said, watching the landscape twist and buckle under the weight of their collective histories. Yeah, Quillen agreed, feeling the energy of the breach thrumming through him. But we're not done yet. The confluence's core is still in there somewhere, holding this mess together. We need a killer punch, Ven said, the gleam in his eye suggesting he already had an idea. Something that'll make them wish they'd never tangled with us. Right, Quillen said, his mind racing. He could see the path now, away to the heart of the dreamscape's madness. We hit them where they least expect it, our own twisted twist. Story of our lives, Sarah muttered, ready to keep pushing. Exactly, Quillen replied. We throw our stories into the glitch, let them spiral into a new kind of chaos, one the confluence can't control. With a shared nod, they turned towards the breach, their stories coalescing into a weapon like no other. Quillen could feel the weight of their tales, each one a bomb primed to explode. Let's do it, he said, setting his sights on the core of the confluence. Let's give them a story they'll never forget. With that, they unleashed their memories, their voices rising in a cacophony of defiance. The dreamscape shuddered, the weaver's web of control unraveling with every word. Quillen felt the ground beneath him give way, a vertigo-inducing lurch as the glitch opened wide, drawing them into its depths. Hope you brought your parachutes, Ven quipped as they plunged into the heart of the chaos, the dreamscape collapsing around them like a house of cards in a hurricane. They found themselves in the core, surrounded by the confluence's control, tendrils of alien thought and memory intertwining like cosmic spaghetti. It was a mess, and Quillen had always been good at making messes. Now's the time, Sarah called out, her voice clear and strong in the swirling chaos. Let's show them what humans are made of. Quillen nodded, feeling the power of their stories surging through him like a live wire. With a deep breath, he focused on his darkest, most powerful memory, the one tale that had haunted him for years. I once loved someone, he began, his voice steady, even as the core of the confluence pulsed in an attempt to silence him. We were supposed to build a life together, but I got them killed. The words were like a knife, cutting through the confluence's defenses. Quillen felt the weight of his confession, the raw emotion a weapon unlike any other. It was my fault, he continued, his voice unwavering. I made a choice and it cost them everything. As his story reached its peak, the confluence shuddered, the core fracturing under the weight of his remorse. Quillen could feel the weavers retreating, their control unraveling in the face of his unfiltered truth. The dreamscape convulsed one last time, its structure tearing apart at the seams. With a final surge of effort, they pushed the confluence back, their stories carving a path to freedom. In that moment, Quillen felt the weight lift, the burden of his past finally laid bare. The dreamscape dissolved around them, and they found themselves standing in the wreckage of their own creation, a world remade by their defiance. We did it, Sarah said, a note of wonder in her voice. We actually did it. Never doubted us for a second, Ven replied, though the hint of surprise in his tone suggested otherwise. Quillen looked around, seeing the exhaustion and relief etched on their faces. They had faced their demons and come out the other side, scarred but victorious. Guess the confluence wasn't ready for a plot twist like us, he said, echoing the words that had carried him through the nightmare. To the stories we write, Sarah said, raising an imaginary glass once more. And to the messes we make, Ven added with a grin, the first genuine smile Quillen had seen in ages. As they stood together, Quillen felt a sense of camaraderie that was more potent than any dreamscape or alien manipulation. They were survivors, each of them carrying a story that could topple empires, and in the end, that was all that mattered. For in a universe where reality was as malleable as a politician's promise, it was their stories, the raw, unvarnished truth, that defined them. As they turned to face whatever lay ahead, Quillen knew that they would do so as a team, a ragtag bunch of misfits who had dared to defy the gods and come out victorious. Let's get out of here, he said, feeling the weight of their victory settling into something that felt a lot like hope. Yes, Sarah agreed, her eyes on the horizon. We've got a universe to annoy, and with that they walked away from the chaos they had wrought, leaving the dreamscape behind, a relic of a war fought and one with nothing more than the power of human stubbornness. As they stepped into the unknown, Quillen couldn't help but smile. After all, they had proven one thing beyond a shadow of a doubt. Never underestimate the power of a good story, or a terrible one. Quillen Dreck stood in the aftermath of chaos, surrounded by the ruins of a dreamscape that had once been as tangled as a hoarder's basement. The air shimmered with the last remnants of the confluence's control, those cosmic spaghetti tendrils now lying limp like overcooked noodles. It wasn't quite the sightseeing tour he'd imagined when he signed up for a leadership gig, but here he was, fresh from kicking some alien ass with nothing more than a library of personal disasters. Well, that was anticlimactic, Ven remarked, hands on hips, surveying the wreckage with the air of a man who'd seen better, less migraine-inducing days. Speak for yourself, Sarah countered, picking her way across the debris with the grace of a cat avoiding puddles. I feel like I just puked out my darkest secrets and somehow it saved the universe. Therapy didn't cover that in the brochure. Your secrets, your puke, Quillen said, flashing a grin that was more wolfish than friendly. I'm just glad we're back to good old physical reality. No more gravity-defying furniture or skies the color of a bad bruise. They stood together on what used to be the heart of the confluence's dreamscape, the aliens' last stand against a bunch of stubborn humans with more baggage than a space freighter on holiday. Now, instead of mind-bending chaos, they were faced with the cold, hard facts of reality, a universe that didn't care about their triumphs or failures, but one they'd carved a place in just the same. Thessa Merck, still getting her bearings after the whole unconscious adventure she'd been on, was leaning against a fallen pillar. Her breathing was steady, a good sign considering they'd half expected her to wake up and start quoting Vaughan poetry or something equally disastrous. "Hey, Thessa," Quillen called, waving a hand in front of her face to test if she was fully back to the land of the living. "You still with us, or did the confluence leave you with a permanent case of the stupids?" Thessa blinked, her eyes focusing on him like a camera lens finally adjusting. "I'm here," she said, voice rough as a rusted bolt. "Just processing. I didn't expect my dreams to be weaponized." "Welcome to the club," Sarah quipped, patting Thessa on the shoulder. "We could use another member in our brains or a dumpster fire support group," Quillen snorted. "Seems like we've all got potential for starting our own reality TV show. Survivor, Mind Games has a nice ring to it." Ven shook his head, a sardonic smile curling his lips. "Only if there's a prize involved. Otherwise, I'm not reliving this nightmare for the entertainment of couch potatoes." The Dreamscape's dissolution had left them standing in the wreckage of what might have once been a bustling world, now reduced to rubble and silence. It was, in Quillen's mind, a testament to human stubbornness. They were the cockroaches of the universe, thriving in the most impossible of circumstances. "So, what's the plan now?" Sarah asked. "We just leave this mess behind and go back to our regularly scheduled programming." Quillen looked around, at the faces of his crew, battered, bruised, but somehow more alive than they'd been when they'd first stumbled into this madness. They'd faced down cosmic horrors armed with nothing but their stories, and damn it, they'd won. "I reckon we do what we do best," he said, voice carrying the certainty of a man who'd crossed into the absurd and come back laughing. "Find a bar, get drunk, and brag about how we gave an alien hive mind a psychological breakdown." Ven chuckled. "Sounds like a plan. I've been in need of a stiff drink and a softer mattress." Thessa rubbed her temples, her engineering mind already ticking away at problems unseen. "And maybe figure out how to use what we learned to our advantage. There's gotta be more to this Dreamscape tech than just being a cosmic party trick." "Always thinking," Quillen said, nodding approvingly. "It's why we keep you around." "Well, that and your ability to fix anything with a roll of duct tape." Sarah sighed, the sound more relieved than world-weary for once. "Honestly, I just want to sit down somewhere that isn't constantly rearranging itself under my ass." Quillen clapped his hands, the sound echoing in the stillness like a gunshot. "All right then, let's move out. We've got a universe to annoy, and I for one can't wait to remind it why underestimating humans is a bad idea." They made their way through the remnants of the Dreamscape, each step a reminder that they'd won. Not just the battle against the confluence, but against their own personal demons. They'd weaponized their traumas, turned their scars into swords, and hacked the dam system in a way no one, especially not the Weavers, had seen coming. "You think the confluence will regroup?" Ven asked, his voice just a touch too nonchalant to be casual. "Wouldn't doubt it," Sarah replied, cracking her knuckles. "But we've got their number now. Next time, they're gonna need more than bad dreams and creepy decor to take us down." As they walked, Quillen found himself reflecting on the power of stories. In the Dreamscape, they'd wielded them like weapons, but here in the real world, they were something else entirely. Stories were what held them together, what gave them strength when everything else fell apart. They were the thread that bound them to humanity, even in the darkest reaches of space. "Hey," he said, drawing the attention of his crew. "I know this might sound sappy, but I think we ought to write this down. Our stories, I mean, make sure they don't just fade away into the ether." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Quillen Drex, getting sentimental. I must be dreaming." "Don't flatter yourself," Quillen shot back. "I just figure that if we can use our stories to break a dreamscape, who knows what else they might do." Thessa nodded, the look in her eyes saying she understood the importance of what Quillen was suggesting. "Future generations might need a good laugh," she said dryly, "or a cautionary tale." Ven clapped Quillen on the back, his expression surprisingly earnest. "Count me in. If nothing else, it'll be nice to remember that once upon a time, we kicked some serious cosmic ass." With the decision made, they fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes from shared experiences and mutual respect. They might not be the galaxy's greatest heroes, but they were theirs, and that was enough. As they approached the wreckage of what had once been their home, Quillen felt a strange sort of peace settle over him. They'd faced the unknown and come out the other side. Sure, they were still as dysfunctional as ever, but they'd proven that even the most broken of people could stand strong against the darkness. "Think we'll miss the Dreamscape?" Sarah asked, her tone betraying just a hint of nostalgia. Quillen snorted. "Not if I can help it. Give me a good old-fashioned bar fight over cosmic mind games any day." "To the stories we write," Ven said, picking up Sarah's earlier toast as they stepped into their reclaimed home. "And to the messes we make," Thessa added, a wry smile playing on her lips. Quillen nodded, feeling the weight of their victory settle into something more potent than triumph, hope. In a universe that could change at the whim of cosmic pranksters, they'd found a way to carve out a space for themselves. They'd made their stories matter. To us, he said, raising an imaginary glass, and to showing the universe just what we're made of. With that, they set their sights on the horizon, ready to face whatever lay ahead. They were a ragtag bunch of misfits, but they were also something more. They were storytellers, and they'd proven that even in the darkest corners of the cosmos, a good story could change the world. As they left the ruins of the Dreamscape behind, Quillen knew one thing for certain: they were just getting started. The universe was vast, unpredictable, and possibly insane, but it was theirs for the taking, and with a crew like his, anything was possible. "Let's get out of here," he said, his voice filled with a determination that was as unbreakable as the stories they'd told. "Yes," Sarah agreed, her eyes on the horizon. "We've got a universe to annoy." And with that, they walked forward together, united by the stories they'd shared and the battles they'd won. The universe was waiting, and they were ready.